All right, thank you for joining us today. On this episode of Pathways to Energy Efficiency, we're going to be talking about renewable heating and cooling, and we're really going to be focusing on air source and ground source heat pumps. And we're really lucky today, we have a special presenter that's come in from Fourth Coast, Rob Campany, and he's going to teach us all about air source and ground source heat pumps. But before we do that, before I introduce Rob, I want to go over a little bit of the housekeeping we always do. So if you have missed some of our previous episodes, you can check them out on our Facebook page. We've gone over a myriad of topics, all revolving around your home energy use. Some of those include net zero homes and how to achieve them. And what we're learning about today is a big part of achieving a net zero home. Reading your utility bill, so all those hidden charges and everything that are onto your utility bill, what do they mean, what are they? We've gone over the building envelope, so that thermal boundary, great insulation and air sealing for your home, which is the first step, as we've talked about, before you approach an air source or ground source heat pump or solar energy or things like that. You want to focus on your efficiency first. We've also talked about electricity vampires in the home, and last week we covered renewable heat, but focused on the biomass side of things. So that's wood, stoves, pellet stoves, things like that. Okay. And so as we go on today, if you have any questions, you can always reach out to myself, Jen, and Nick. So I cover Jefferson and Lewis counties. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me. If you live in Clinton, Essex, or Hamilton County, you can reach out to Jen Perry of Adirondack North Country Association. And finally, if you live in St. Lawrence or Franklin counties, feel free to reach out to Nick Hamilton Honey of Cornell Cooperative Extension of St. Lawrence County. Okay, so with that, I'm really pleased to present Rob Campany. He's going to teach us about air source and ground source heat pumps. Thank you for joining us, Rob.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Katie, Nick, and Jen for inviting us to maybe share some of what we've learned in the last 12 years with your viewers on air source and ground source heat pumps. Just real quickly, Fourth Coast, we're located in Clayton, New York, and got into the renewable energy business about 12 years ago with our focus mainly on solar energy. But as we increased our knowledge on renewables and with the volatility of fuel prices, we quickly learned that heating and cooling needs in our region were coming to the forefront, and it makes a great marriage with solar energy to be able to provide clean heating and cooling sources that can use electricity as opposed to fossil fuels. So we started with geothermal about 10 years ago, and we were happy with the results, and certainly we learned a lot because no one else was really involved at that point in time. And now with the advent of air source heat pumps, it's really provided homeowners and businesses with a great opportunity to not only reduce their reliance on fossil fuels, but to be able to use that renewable energy created by solar and wind, either on their own homes or by subscribing to the many renewable energy sources that are available through their utility. So we're really excited that given this opportunity and kind of spread the word, if you will, because we're still figuring it out because there are options that present themselves every day in the heating and cooling world, and we're happy to share what we've learned and try to answer any questions that we can. So with that, today we're going to focus on the two basic types of heat pumps that we use, and that's air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps. So everybody has a heat pump in their home, and I don't think they realize that a refrigerator is really a heat pump. And what a heat pump simply does is it takes either heating or cooling and transfers it from one area to another. So your refrigerator is kind of the basic heat pump that everybody has, by taking that heat from the inside of the refrigerator and rejecting it to coils. And these older style refrigerators, the coils were always on the back, and you could put your hand on them and feel the heat coming off those. And where that heat is coming from is in the inside of the refrigerator. So it's everybody has experienced a heat pump, maybe not understood what it is. Now, our modern day heat pumps, the difference between a refrigerator and a heat pump used for heating and cooling is that our modern day heat pumps have what's called a reversing valve. And we'll go to the next slide, Katie. So the evaporator and condenser that either rejects heat or absorbs heat is separated by a simple compressor and an expansion valve that, through the compression and expansion of the refrigerant in the heat pump cycle, it moves heat from one area to the other. And as I said, in our new heat pumps, there is also a reversing valve, so we can reverse that flow, and instead of absorbing heat and cooling the space, we can reject heat. So this is very simple. The science is not so simple. I'm not even going to try to explain the science because I don't fully understand it all myself sometimes. But the common question is, well, how the heck can we get heat from the air outside when it's zero out and heat our homes to 70 degrees inside? And that's all due to the compression cycle and the refrigeration expansion being able to absorb and reject that heat. So this is a very simple graphic of how that works. So every heat pump will have a compressor, refrigeration loops, an evaporator, and condenser. So the next slide, John. So again, that basic principle is present in both the air source or ground source. Now, if I use the term mini split, that's kind of become the common name for air source heat pumps, and geothermal has become the common name for a ground source heat pump. So if I use those terms interchangeably, that's what I mean. So the typical air source heat pump or mini split includes an outdoor unit and an indoor unit. And you've probably seen these indoor units as they become popular in many homes and businesses. Oftentimes they're mounted high on the wall. And then the outdoor unit, again, which have become popular, includes a unit that's on a stand and has a vertical fan in front of the coil to move air, whether it's in heating or cooling mode, across the coil. Now, connecting the two are refrigerant lines that are depicted in this image by the blue and red lines, where the red line would be the high pressure refrigerant line, and then the low pressure coming back to the outdoor unit in the blue line. So what happens is when you're in heating mode, as this image depicts, the heat energy is absorbed by the outdoor air unit, and then it's transported. The compressor is in the outdoor air unit, and that energy is transported to the indoor unit, of which it's released, and the cool indoor air enters the, we call these high wall indoor units, passes over a coil, and then the air coming out of the bottom of the unit is warmer than the air entering, and then the refrigerant travels back to the outdoor unit and the cycle continues. So the next slide, Katie. Well, this is a more of a photo depiction of what this might look like The refrigerant lines are often surface mounted, either on the interior wall or exterior wall of the home. They can be placed in what's called a line hide or PVC paintable duct, and the refrigerant lines would be hidden within that slim duct cover. Also inside there would be a control wire from the indoor unit to the outdoor unit. So the indoor unit is what senses the room temperature and turns the outdoor unit on and off. So it's really pretty simple. Now that last slide was a single indoor unit connected to a single outdoor unit, but you can connect multiple indoor units. And the industry has also come up with many different configurations of indoor units. So in this image, you see the typical high wall unit on the right, and then the two units on the left, in the center and left, are units that can be either mounted in the ceiling. So the far left indoor unit, the coil and fan is actually up above the ceiling, so all you would see is that white grill. And then the center unit would be what's called a low static unit, and that's again has the coil and a fan, and that can be hidden either under the floor or above the ceiling, and ductwork connected to those in a more traditional way. There's even some indoor units. One manufacturer has an indoor unit that looks like a picture frame, so you can actually mount your favorite photo or painting in the picture frame, and the air circulates from around the frame into the room. So the manufacturers are coming up with a lot of different alternatives for indoor units to serve the needs of your installation, because everybody seems to have a lot of, well, to back up, many of our installations are retrofits. So you walk into a home and certainly it's fully appointed with the furniture and wall coverings and pictures on the wall. So it's difficult sometimes to place these indoor units, but usually with a little bit of discussion with the homeowner, we can come up with a good selection of indoor units that doesn't require a lot of modifications or rearranging of furniture in the home. The next slide. So now we'll talk a little bit about ground source heat pumps or geothermal. Same basic principle where you have a compressor and a source, which in the case of the mini splits is the outside air. In this case, it's the ground. So the important thing about geothermal is that the ground temperature in our region is pretty constant, usually between 45 and 50 degrees. And so as you can imagine, it's much easier to extract heat from 50-degree ground temperature as opposed to 0-degree air temperature in the case of an air source heat pump. So in general, geothermal heat pumps are more cost effective. I shouldn't say cost effective, I should say more efficient than air source heat pumps. Because of the installation, which requires the installation of the ground loop, geothermal systems are generally more expensive. However, geothermal is also subsidized to a greater level with federal income tax credits. So we can talk a little bit more about that later. But in theory, these two heat pump technologies, air source and ground source, are very similar. The only difference is where they get their heat source from, or where they reject the heat in the case of cooling. So there's a number of different sources, ground sources that we've used over the years. So this simple graphic shows the four common types of sources. One is a ground vertical collector, which is usually a well that's drilled anywhere from 200 to 500 feet deep, and it's can be installed by a well driller, the same well driller that might drill your water well. And within that well, typically a 6-inch borehole, there'll be a black plastic pipe, usually 1 inch or 1.25 inches in diameter, that will go down into the well, and then there'll be a U-bend at the very bottom, and it'll come back up into the house. And so that provides the heat exchange for the heat pump located in the home. So the vertical well is most common where you have small lot sizes and you're somewhat limited on space, or you're close to bedrock and you don't have excavatable soils. The typical home would need 1 or 2 wells for the typical 2,000 to 3,000 square feet home, just to give you some sense. The other 3 sources depicted here is the ground loop collector, which are usually trenches that are excavated, and the high density polyethylene pipe placed in the trenches, or a horizontal bed can be prepared. Typically those 2 are dug anywhere between 6 and 8 feet deep, so you need 6 to 8 feet of soil to be able to install those. The last common source would be a pond loop, and what this would include is a heat exchanger that would be placed in the bottom of a pond or a lake. That basically the ground keeps the water at the bottom of a pond relatively close to the ground temperature of 50 degrees. You do need a pond that's at least 7 or 8 feet deep and maybe 1/4 to 1/2 an acre in size in order to provide the adequate heat source. But in general, those are the four sources that are commonly used in a geothermal system. Next slide, Katie. So this is a typical ground source. You can see, get some sense. This is about a 4 foot or 5 foot deep trench. You can see the pipes that are being installed at the bottom. Next slide, Katie. This is another configuration. It's called the slinky. As you can see, it's similar to the old slinkies we used to play with, and it allows a little more pipe to be installed per lineal foot of trench. But again, the soils, the wetter the soils, the better the heat transfer between the soil and the piping. So we like wet soils, but not so wet as it can't be installed. So the summertime is certainly the best to install any ground loop like this. Next slide. So in a geothermal system, this is what the heat pump would typically look like. So this is a water to air heat pump, and the water source from either the wells or the ground loops would be coming in the lower left-hand corner of this photograph. And you could see there's a couple of pumps mounted to the wall that circulate the fluid. And in this photo, the pipes come up behind the ductwork, and then they enter the heat pump in the lower right-hand corner of this photo. They're insulated with black, or I guess that's black flexible tubing connecting to the heat pump. And one is a supply and one is a return. So that's constantly flowing. So it might enter the heat pump at, say, 50 degrees. And then in heating mode, the water would be cooled to about probably 45 degrees or so, and then return to the well to heat back up to 50 degrees. So the lower section of this unit is the compressor. And then the upper section of this unit is no different than your furnace. It has a squirrel cage fan that comes on and off as either heating or cooling is needed in the home. So it really looks pretty much like your standard furnace, only there's no fuel line and there's no fuel tank. It's simply connected to your electrical panel in your home. All right, so it's fairly straightforward. We can also do water to water heat pumps. In-floor radiant heat has become very popular in our area. And so ground source heat pumps are very good at supplying that lower temperature water, that water being about 100 degrees Fahrenheit, that would typically circulate through your in-floor loops. So this is a typical setup. Again, they're very simple. The heat pump is connected to the ground loop, and then to the various in-floor loops. Those would be the pipes that are mounted on the wall to the left would be the various in-floor heating loops. Next slide. So as you get on the internet and you research heat pumps, there's two numbers that you always want to pay attention to. One is the COP and the other is SEER. So the coefficient of operating performance, and I won't get into the details of that, but the higher COP you have for your equipment, the better off you are. And typically, air source heat pumps have a coefficient of operating performance of between 2 and 3. Geothermal has a COP of between 3 and 4 generally. And what that means is for every kilowatt hour of energy you put in, if you have a COP of 4, you're going to get 4 kilowatt hour, the effective energy out 4 times greater than just the kilowatt energy, single kilowatt that you provide. SEER, again, is the energy efficiency ratio relative to cooling. The higher the SEER value, means the higher the efficiency the cooling unit is in that operating mode. So you want to pay attention to those when you research various equipment. Next slide. So the benefits of air source heat pumps, and I give credit to NYSERDA for this slide because, and again, NYSERDA has a great website that you can go to that depicts the benefits of heat pumps, but certainly one of the biggest benefits is you don't require combustion of fossil fuels and release of carbon into the atmosphere. They're very efficient, and I've got another slide here in a second that will provide you some cost comparisons, but they are very efficient. And typically they give you pretty good control, particularly the mini splits where you have multiple indoor units, and you can control your individual indoor units to those space temperatures. So room by room control is very easily accomplished with air source heat pumps. And then the longevity of these units, we found that the longevity is very, very good. The only real moving part is the compressor. So you can compare the longevity of these heat pumps with the longevity of refrigerators and freezers. You know, they're very, very quiet, very efficient, very long-lasting compressors that we have today. And again, you don't have the high heat of a fossil fuel burner, whether it's propane or fuel oil. You don't have a chimney, you don't have a fuel tank. So you have all those benefits of not having to maintain a fossil fuel burner that go along with the heat pumps. Just a little comparison. This was a study that was done in Ohio on a typical 2,600 square foot home of what the annualized cost would be, or total cost, I should say, over a period of up to 20 years. And you could see the difference between geothermal air source heat pumps and propane with an air conditioning unit, what your fuel costs might be. So there's, as well as the environmental benefit, without question, there's an economic benefit that goes along with heat pumps. As you can see, it can be quite dramatic over the life of the system. Next slide. So again, I encourage you to visit NYSERDA's website. This is just a screenshot from their clean heat program page that can kind of guide you through the advantages and disadvantages, as well as the rebates. So the next slide is what the rebates currently are on both air source and ground source heat pumps. Through these are National Grid is administering these rebates with the help of NYSERDA. So they are subsidized right now, and it's a good time if you're considering either a new home or replacement of your heating and cooling system. It's a great time to consider heat pumps. So with that, I thank you, Katie, Nick, and Jennifer again, and we'll wrap it up here and answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you again, Rob. We do have a couple of questions. How about air source water heaters?
Air source water heaters are again becoming very popular. So what they have, there's a compressor usually mounted on the top of your hot water tank. And what they do is take the heat from the air and put it in your domestic hot water tank. There's also a NYSERDA rebate for those as well. Very popular. The recovery times are a little slow, so oftentimes the manufacturers include a resistive coil to be able to increase the recovery time of these hot water tanks. So, but air source heat pumps, yes, definitely becoming more prevalent. Again, very cost effective, and typically they'll use half the electricity of a typical electric hot water heater. Good question.
And about how much square footage does each of the heads in the air source heat pumps cover?
Sure. So each manufacturer offers a wide variety of indoor heads. Typically, the smallest indoor head is in that 6,000 BTU range, which would easily cover a medium-sized bedroom, but they make them as large as 36,000 BTUs, or 6 times that amount. So depending on the openness of your floor plan or the space that you want to condition, you could do an entire home with a single head. Obviously, you'll have some hot and cold spots depending upon the floor plan. So it's really an individual decision on how many heads to put in between the room sizes and the openness of your floor plan. So there's a lot of flexibility there.
All right. Well, thank you again for your time. Jen's gonna lead us out of this week's episode.
So again, thank you, Rob, so much for your time and expertise. I know you've been in the clean energy field for a really long time, and we really appreciate your perspective. Just to remind everyone of our upcoming episodes, next week we're taking a break as we will be participating in a conference. But after that, we're going to start diving into solar. So starting with residential solar, community hydro, community renewable energy sources, including solar, community solar, and community hydro. And then we will transition on the 17th to talk about community solar, which many of you might see popping up in your neighborhoods. And then we are into Thanksgiving. So no episode the week of Thanksgiving. Thanks, Sunken, so much for your time. And
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks.